I guess this is just another lost cause, Mr. Payne. All you people don't know about lost causes. Mr. Payne does. He said once they were the only causes worth fighting for. And he fought for them once. They were the only reason any man ever fights for them. Because of just one plain simple rule. Love thy neighbor. And in this world today full of hatred, a man who knows that one rule has a great trust. You know that rule, Mr. Payne. And I loved you for it just as my father did. And you know that you fight for the lost causes harder than for any others. Yes, you even died for them. Like a man we both know, Mr. Payne. You think I'm late? You all think I'm late. Well, I'm not late. And I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause. Even if this room gets filled with lies like these. And the tailors and all their armies come marching into this place. Somebody will listen to me.
Oh, when I tell you that Tom, while being a very nice guy, is the devil.
This isn't friendship. You're crazy, you know that?
What do you think the devil's gonna look like if he's around?
God.
Come on, no one's gonna be taken in by a guy with a long, red, pointy tail. Come on, what's he gonna sound like? No. I'm semi-serious here.
You're serious?
He will be attractive. He'll be nice and helpful. He'll get a job where he influences a great God-fearing nation. He'll never do an evil thing. He'll never deliberately hurt a living thing. He'll just bit by little bit lower our standards where they're important. Just a tiny little bit. Just coax along, flash over substance. Just a tiny little bit. And he'll talk about all of us really being salesmen. And he'll get all the great women.
Hey, Aaron! I think you're the devil!
You know I'm not!
How?
Because I think we have the kind of friendship where if I were the devil, you'd be the only one I would tell.
Well, you were awfully quick to run after Tom's help when
All right,
you wanted help!
Yes! And if things had gone well for me tonight, then I probably wouldn't be saying any of this. I grant you everything. But give me this. He personifies everything that you've been fighting against. And I'm in love with you. How do you like that? I buried the lead.
A modern day remake of Matthew Vaughn's Lake. Kick a Coen brothers end up with Timothy Chalamet. A Citizen Kane prequel, a Midnight Cowboy sequel. Alvin and the Chipmunks deserve another squeakquel. There's so many new ways to revisit sideways, but a graphic novel is how we choose to update. But we still hold fast, you can't change the past on the Ruined Childhoods podcast.
Greetings, starfighters, pundits, and policymakers. This is Ruined Childhoods, and on this episode, we are deep in the swamp where laws are made, senators get paid, and if you're the Nationals, baseball games get played. This district is home to over 70 museums, including the National Gallery of Art, the International Spy Museum, and the National Deaf Life Museum. Taking a show at the Kennedy Center, the Gala Hispanic Theater, or if you're feeling brave, Ford's Theater. On our cinematic trek across America, this is the only area with 4 capitals, letters W, D, and C, and the building with the giant dome. That's right, we're in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Dan, have you ever had to get stitches in D.C. after busting your chin open at the Arlington National Cemetery, or was that just me?
Well, I don't know if it was just you, but it definitely wasn't me. But
Between the two of us, it's just me, though.
What a memory. So yeah, greetings, starfighters. And of course, that's a common memory is John and I are brothers.
We are.
And
True.
We're both on that fateful trip to Washington, D.C. back in the November of 1986, if I'm correct.
Was it 86? Okay.
And was that at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier?
Dude, I was 3. I don't remember.
So technically this happened in Virginia, but the hospital that you were brought to was in I believe was in Washington, D.C.
Dude, I just know what I'm told. I was 3. What do I remember?
I just have the
scar to recall the story, but that's it.
You went to the same hospital, and I think you were treated in the same room where Reagan was brought after being shot by John Hinckley, who, like us, was an obsessive movie fan.
Yeah. Jodie Foster's great.
Anyway.
I mean, the story goes that it was the room where Reagan was, patched up. But
I remember
I don't know where that story came from.
It goes back like that one is like, I remember being told that at the time, but then again, I was also 9.
Yeah.
So I am now much older than that.
You're over 9?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a bit over 9, just by a few decades, almost 4. But anyway, that's neither here nor there, but we're here, or rather I am here in Seattle. John, you are there in Portland, Oregon. Yeah. And hopefully Starfighters, you are here to hear scintillating discussion of 2 of the greatest movies ever made, and both movies that are set in Washington, D.C. and are very much about Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Before we recorded, I alluded to the idea of them being not so much like one another, and it appeared as if you had thoughts to the contrary. So I'm curious to see where that takes us later on.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I think, and of course we're talking about 2 movies that are separated by almost 50 years.
Yeah.
We have Mr. Smith Goes to Washington from 1939, like a year of classics, whether
right.
Gone with the Wind, with The Wizard of Oz,
Yeah.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. What else?
Yeah. I know, I was gonna say, you needn't say more.
No,
yeah.
Without doing some internet searching, I don't think I could name more. But anyway, now we've got broadcast news, and then we've got broadcast news from 1987.
Yeah. Oh, and Dan, that reminds me, I'm going to actually sit on the back of my shirt so that my line looks good.
So yeah, I took some of the shoulder pads out of my wife's jackets and
out of this t-shirt.
I meant to do that. No. And yes. And I've asked, the neighbors to just keep an eye out. And if I text them with an SOS to come over and blow dry my
dab your
flop
forehead.
Sweat.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's broadcast news. Or you know what, John, the worst thing that could happen for this is that I might just decide to filibuster for days.
Oh, geez. No, the tangents must have a limit.
No. Absolutely not. In fact, John, I think we should get right to it
Agreed.
And jump into the synopsis, and let's start talking about these Washington D.C. movies.
Yeah. We're going to go in chronological order.
That we are.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington first. All right. Are you ready to synopsize this 1939 classic?
Yeah, I mean, you're the one who's going to synopsize it, so I'm ready for you to do it.
Then let's do it.
All right, synopsize and listen. John is back.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry, I got nothing.
After the death of a U.S. senator, his state's other senators, governor, and the corrupt businessman who owns them decide to replace the late senator with a likable pushover. After the pleas of his menagerie of children, Governor Kibbe selects Jefferson Smith, a good old boy and editor-in-chief of a small newspaper for adventurous boys. He is quickly taken under the wing of Senator Joseph Payne, an old pal of Smith's father. Payne sets Jeff up with Clarissa Saunders to get him acclimated to the office, but what Jeff doesn't know is that she has orders from Payne to ensure that Jeff gets in line with the commands of his elders. In exchange, Saunders is set to profit off of a new dam being built in their state. She sets in motion a clever way to build Jeff's confidence in Payne. She has the press pool make Jeff look like a stooge, which is sure to get him running for Payne's help. What Payne doesn't realize is that he suggests that Jeff, this is like a tongue twister synopsis. He suggests that Jeff propose a bill to the Senate that actually puts his dam in jeopardy. Jeff's plan is to build an outdoor school for boys to feel more connected to their country, and the bill is quite popular. In an effort to squash the bill and Jeff's credibility, Payne and James Taylor, the businessman who pulls the strings, fudge records to make it look like Jeff bought the land that he proposed as the site for the outdoor program, making it seem like he's pulling a scheme to take money away from children. Feeling utterly defeated, Jeff sulks with his tail between his legs, but a plan hatched with Saunders gets him his mojo back. He performs an impressive filibuster in the Senate, pleading the country to believe his side of the story, despite Taylor's efforts to report false news to the American people. Woo! Okay.
Yeah.
Famously, James Stewart is Jefferson Smith, Jean Arthur is Saunders, Claude Rains is Senator Joseph Payne, wearing a wig that I could not take my eyes off of. We have Edward Arnold as James Taylor. Oh, I'm sorry. I said Governor Kibbe. It's Governor Hopper. It's Guy Kibbe who plays him.
Yes.
You
got your Kibbe and your Hoppers all mixed up.
What are you going to do? There's
Kibbies
a lot
and
of
bits.
people to remember. Anyway, there's plenty of other people in this. No need to get into all of them. Dan, you quite like this movie, huh?
Yes. I saw this movie not too long ago. I referenced it a few episodes back as just something that I had seen for the first time ever. Certainly a movie that I've heard of, and I could have told you, yes, with James Stewart, and it's Frank Capra directed it.
Yeah.
But I had not seen this, and I know that like this is one of those roles that was always like, hey, if Tom Hanks was going to remake a Jimmy Stewart movie, like this would be, and of course you watch it and you're just like, yes, I could like a 90s, an early to mid 90s Tom Hanks as a Mr. Smith would be perfect because he's Tom Hanks and he's certainly played, more unsavory types, but he's generally associated with good-hearted, more pure characters. So, and Jefferson Smith is that. And Jefferson Smith, what struck me about this movie was, first of all, how relevant it is today.
Yeah.
And I think we've come to expect corruption and graft in government. It's very easy to believe, whenever there's a rumor of corruption because it's happened so many times, and that's on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
And the character of Jefferson Smith being the type of person who you're like, yes, like the kids are right. You're like, yes, this is absolutely the type of person. Imagine if every state elected their representatives with those standards, but also imagine if candidates like that could run. And of course he doesn't run, he's appointed. So
yes,
he kind of lucks into this, doesn't really luck his way into this position because he's built up this credibility and trust with I know they're not the Boy Scouts, with the Boy Rangers.
Yeah, whatever.
Boy Rangers. And so he's built up this credibility, and he's got that like strength of character. We don't know that much about him, about his background. We also, and this is something I love about the movie, don't know what state he is from or is
they
representing.
keep the state vague.
Well, very much the idea that this could happen. This doesn't have to be about one specific state. And we don't put that because the filmmakers, I'm sure, didn't want us to say like, oh, yes, well, of course that happens in that state.
Well, the movie was adapted from a book, which is a senator from Montana. The movie decided we're just going to leave that part out of it so that it could seem like it's in any state, Right.
Yeah, no, which is brilliant, but also is interesting. And it reminds me of, because like, I feel that politicians like this are few and far between. I've also recently listened to a historical podcast about, and part of it was about a senator from Wyoming, Lester Hunt, who was, you know, very well liked, but he was also like that really good-hearted, pure like family man, and, you know, certainly a man's man, but not one to be, you know, pushed around. And his kind of rise to Congress kind of coincides with Joseph McCarthy, who it eventually ends up, you know, you could definitely look up the story of Wyoming Senator Lester Hunt and his dealings with Joseph McCarthy and how it all connects with the far right and the rise of fascism in America.
Sure.
But Hunt was driven, you learned this in the first episode, so driven to suicide by the corruption and the pressure campaigns put on him, much like how Smith has these smear campaigns set in action against him by the Taylor machine, the Jim Taylor machine, using Payne as their puppet, he's such a part of the establishment that he's in too deep. Of course, we see where that goes in the movie, and that's one of the other things I love about the movie is the arc of that character. And I very much wanted that character to have some type of moral redemption by the end of it, which, I mean, by the end of it is like, I don't want to give much away because it's a wonderful scene when it happens, but I think it's really important. You kind of do see how he comes around and how Smith has a moral victory over him.
Right.
But yeah, it struck me how the movie played with both the reality and the ideal. And when we think about like, the founding fathers, because he goes to like, he is devoted to the Constitution and he knows history, Jefferson Smith, that is. And he knows it so well and is so dedicated to it that he can't stand to see it subverted or see it's almost like blasphemy to say like, this is what the founding fathers would have wanted. And he kind of knows he realizes he is what they had in mind.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, or rather, maybe their ideals aimed higher than they could actually achieve, but it doesn't necessarily matter if the founding fathers weren't able to achieve that. They set up a system where representatives could develop that government into, and it brings back the question of like, well, the grammar, like you can't say a more perfect union, but it makes sense in saying that it's never going, anytime we think, we've got this down, it's perfect, there's always work to be done.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's I'm an English teacher, folks, so I know of which I speak in the realm of grammar.
Yeah.
Also in bullshitting. So there's a dose of that in there as well. But I thought it was wonderful. And then, recently we've had Minnesota Governor Tim Walz become a big and kind of a parallel story where he runs for office because his students encourage him to. Now, he runs for office. He's not appointed, and it's his students. They're not the governor's kids. Of course, it's not the same thing. But
the governor's 30 children.
Well, yeah. And I love. So there is that watching this movie recently. And not even just kind of being like, okay, this will be a good thing. Let me check this out. And wow, it was about time I saw it, and just kind of watching it as the Tim Walz, profile is going national, and seeing like, man, this is it was maybe within the same week that I heard the first time I heard an interview with Walz, and it was before he was announced, but when he was being considered.
Sure.
And the commonality of like, he seems genuinely devoted to doing good things for people.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
Yeah. So back to Mr. Smith. Yeah, it really struck me on a number of levels as a film that, I mean, clearly it wasn't like, oh, ahead of its time. It's just that, like, those problems, it's a reminder to us that, hey, these problems have always been there, and just to make it clear, these are who the bad guys are.
Well, I will say it was ahead of its time in the sense that I believe it is the first movie that, of many, many, many movies and television shows and things like that, that are about a person who's appointed to a political position as a tool for corrupt politicians to do shady business.
Right.
I mean, that is, tale as old as time. I guess 1939, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. At least I couldn't find anything earlier that was really fitting that category.
Well, and what's interesting is you look at the politics of the time, and you've got Roosevelt is
1939.
Well, I mean, the
Sure,
American politics,
yeah.
I guess. But, but there was a lot of the corruption, and there was there was all that, of course. But yeah, I think, this movie is the first, or among the first, definitely in America, to portray that type of corruption. But yeah, it's real.
I mean, we've talked about this kind of thing before on our Dave episode.
Yeah.
That's another one where they, it's set up differently, but it is bringing in this, nobody who is just there to kind of do what the people pulling the strings want him to do.
Who's a genuinely good person.
Yes, but instructed to just kind of stay quiet while the other guys in the background kind of do what they want to do, or what they're seeking out to do. And we talked about a lot of this kind of stuff also in that series that we did that was all about cinematic presidents.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on what really happened in The Man with James Earl Jones, but I think that was another one where it's just like, kind of plucked from obscurity a little bit and put into a position of power. Gabriel over the White House was, already an existing president, but that was kind of like a higher power pulling the strings.
Right.
The angel Gabriel.
It's definitely addressed, and that did come a few years before this.
Sure, yeah. But it's different. It's different.
No,
he was already president, and there was
absolutely. No, this movie is its own thing, and it is groundbreaking.
Yeah. I mean, it also reminded me a lot of something that we've talked about before on this podcast, which is the James Brolin television series, Mr. Sterling.
Oh, you mean Josh Brolin?
Didn't I say Josh Brolin?
You said James Brolin.
Oh, all right. Well, Josh Brolin is what I meant to say.
No, that's fascinating.
So Josh Brolin is a junior senator who's essentially placed because his father was a senator and died, and so
his father being James Brolin.
Well, the character's father.
Oh.
And for some reason he gets placed into the position of senator, and nobody expects him to be anything more than just somebody warming a seat for the next guy, but he shakes things up.
Classic.
And there's there's an iconic filibuster episode. Iconic really only to me and our group of friends, but
no,
there is a filibuster episode.
In terms of iconic filibusters, it's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Parks and Recreation, which I rewatched the Patton Oswalt Star Wars filibuster after watching.
The filibuster episode is fantastic of Parks and Rec. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan, I got to tell you something. I didn't like this movie at all.
You didn't like this movie at all? Okay.
No, I saw it for the first time a few years ago. I was working on a show called Swamp Pawn, everybody's favorite CMT show about a Louisiana seafood wholesaler. And there was an episode where the kind of the main character of the show, Rick, was going to Washington to talk about some sort of probably fishing and wildlife thing. It wasn't one of my episodes, so I don't know. And we were discussing titles for the episode, and Mr. Rick Goes to Washington came up, and I was like, I've actually never seen the movie. I should probably go check it out. And I watched it, and I hated it. And I don't care for Frank Capra. And as much as I love Jimmy Stewart, I didn't like this character at all. I thought he was an ass, and I was just waiting for them to kind of use his poor anger management skills against him. They after the newspapers come out with all this stuff going against him, he like punches every single reporter he can find. And that is not a behavior becoming of a proper good old boy politician.
No,
And
well,
so-
and sorry, you keep calling him a good old boy politician, which is a little, I feel like that insinuates that he's Southern, because I think that's kind of the label given to...
I wasn't insinuating that at all. I don't kind of see that as a Southern
Just
thing.
to be clear. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no.
I see that as somebody who is just like altruistic and, they have stars in their eyes and they, just see the good in everything. And when he's brought into this world of corruption, he is then, I was hoping at least that he would then become corrupted by it and go into this fit of violence. And then it like completely brushes over that. I also thought that the movie was kind of poorly made. It was poorly edited. There's all these jump cuts all over the place. There are things that happen that like don't match what's happening in like the next shot. When he's doing his like bird call or whatever, the picture in the newspaper is him doing something completely different. And I don't know. I just care about those things when I'm watching a movie. I care about the attention to detail, and it wasn't there in this
the
movie.
picture that they used for the paper was a different bird call.
Well, he's doing this thing with his fingers in his mouth, and they use something, and then they show something in the paper that makes it look like he's holding his nose, and it says like, Smith thinks Washington stinks or whatever, and it's just like, yeah, if that's what it showed him doing, I could see the line going from like, ooh, he's doing this thing, let's twist it into something else, but like he wasn't even doing that. Anyway, this movie really bothered me, and I don't like it at all.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And what else bothered you about it?
I felt like the end was too abrupt, and I was hoping for a little bit more, and it just went to the credits. It just said the end, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, that really irked me. The things that I did like about it, I liked all of the children actors in it. I thought that they were fantastic.
Yep. That was kind of but speaking of the children though, what did you think like of the sequence where even like the Taylor's enforcers and intimidating like
they're beating the crap out of kids?
Yeah. I'm not in favor of that, but I was like, man, they're going there with that. Yeah. I didn't take that like the whole thing about him punching the reporters. Yeah, that definitely it doesn't play as well now. I bet it played better then. Yeah. I don't know. It like now we look at it and say, oh, clearly he's been triggered by something. He is dealing with anger management issues, and he should definitely seek counseling. 1939 sensibilities, 2024 sensibilities. Yeah, I get that. You know what it reminded me of when he was like punching out the reporters, and to go to another Dick Tracy show, another show about political corruption, Veep. It reminded me of Jonah Ryan just like losing his mind and like, having like a hair trigger response to like anything somebody says about him. And of course it's like a tall, dark haired, yeah, I wouldn't call Mr. Smith a doofus, but like, somebody who's maybe naive. And, definitely. Anyway, yeah. So,
Yeah, that's what that made me think of. I mean, going back to the things I did like about it, I mentioned the kids. So there was this whole thing about like in the Senate chamber, there were children that were essentially escorts for the senators to like
pages.
get them what they need. Yeah. I wonder, like, I'm assuming that that was an actual thing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, when did that end? I mean, I guess it's probably child labor laws, that are the issue with that. But
yeah, I think so.
I thought that was a really fun aspect of the movie, and especially the one who's like assigned to Jeff Smith, with like the little boy ranger, medallion that he's got on his lapel, and even when it's like not okay to be supporting him, he like still has it on the backside of the lapel, and the I liked Saunders and how she, had her change of heart. I did not like how in the filibuster scene, she like writes him, gets him a note, and it says like, so and so says that I love you. He's right, and I'm just like, we don't need that.
No,
that's not necessary. Nothing ever comes of it.
Well, no, I mean, I guess I took that as like something to boost him up as he's like falling apart.
Oh, so are you saying that she said that just to raise his morale, not that she actually meant it?
I don't like, honestly, I don't really like, I remember her sending him notes. I don't specifically remember that one, but like it wouldn't, like, that is definitely how I would have read it, is that she's looking for things and like maybe she meant it, or maybe she doesn't.
I mean, to refresh your memory a little bit, like after he reads it, he kind of like looks up at her and she like smiles in like a loving way at him. So I believe that the character intends to have, expressed emotional feelings for him in that moment. But I really liked, because what I liked so much about her is that she was a woman who had power, and she was exercising that power first for, selfish reasons. And then she kind of buys into, Smith's, I mean, well, same either or, Smith's kind of ideology, and it kind of gets on board and then is helping him. And I appreciate that. I feel like the admission of love diminishes the quality of her character. It just kind of makes it more of like a boy girl kind of a thing rather than like a woman in power kind of a thing.
I mean, if it's genuine.
There's no reason to believe that it's not meant to be genuine. You can go back and watch it.
The character who you're describing, this is someone who's worked in politics, and what I appreciate about their dynamic is that you could tell like there's a reason why she was drawn to this work and to work in this space, where as a woman, she at that time was not going to get much higher than that position.
Well, you know what? I will say this. If after the whole filibuster and everything, there was a scene where like she's at the bus station and he runs into her or something and she's leaving and he's just like, well, what about what you said? And she was just like, that's politics, babe. Then I would have liked it a lot, but they leave you I mean, with that abrupt ending, it does kind of leave you hanging and wondering about it. Made
that.
me wanting so much more.
And I'm not saying that is I'm not saying that that's a good thing per se, but I don't know. I guess as watching it, I didn't focus on that as much.
Right. And I mean, that was just something that, stuck out to me, that made me roll my eyes pretty heavily.
But but to get back, I appreciate that she was someone who I think through Smith rediscovered what drew her to government and public service, and to be in that space. it was kind of like, I didn't think there was anyone else like him still around, but there he is. And to quickly loop back to the question of pages.
Uh-huh.
So the pages in this movie seem a bit young, but the page program, in fact, has been going on and still exists since 1829, when the first page was appointed by Daniel Webster. And the first female pages were introduced in 1971, and pages were teenagers, high school age, that would be nominated by senators, and it would usually be from their home state, and they would be, just delivering documents, things like that. They get housing, they go to a special school. So it is actually, the program only was put on hold during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Interesting. So are they still like high school students, essentially?
Yeah, so they have to be a 16, and this is as per Wikipedia, so...
Well, labor laws, so that makes sense.
A candidate must be 16 or 17-year-old high school student, sophomore, 10th grade, or rising junior, 11th grade, with at least a 3.0 GPA. So I think that's
okay.
That I don't think, I feel like that's a fair threshold. Like, that's not too, they're not asking for a 3.5 or a 4.0.
So you're not great at math. Who cares? Come on.
Yeah, you're off the hook for that. So so that program is in fact still going on, and I know that for Washington State, you can kids can be pages at the state capitol, but it looks like you can, that if you're interested in doing this in DC, go for it. You can live there and be a page and experience all of the magic of Congress.
Oh boy.
Yes.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Bring Lauren Boebert her vape pen.
Oh boy. Yikes.
Yeah. So
well, we should also mention, Harry Carey plays, so it's the president of the Senate, which is the vice president. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. Just getting my American politics, how things fall into place straight. I thought that he was kind of awkward. I don't know. Because I watched the Criterion Blu-ray, and I listened to Frank Capra Jr. does commentary on it, and everyone's talking about how great Harry Carey is. I'm like, I feel like he has some sort of like halitosis gingivitis thing going on, where he's embarrassed about something with his mouth. He keeps uncovering his mouth in a weird way. That was very distracting to me.
Oh, I mean, to me, that was like he was kind of stifling laugh. Like to me, it seemed like
the way he was. There were moments where I got that, but there were other moments where it was just like, I feel like he's embarrassed about his mouth and he's covering it in an awkward way. And he didn't have much to do.
No.
He gets like a couple of moments, swearing in Smith, and of course the filibuster cuts back to him a number of times, and otherwise it's like typical, does Mr. Smith yield for a question, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, he was there so that Smith would have that one person who is like, okay, he is kind of on my side, and that's the president of the Senate, and he's given me that little bit of encouragement.
He's at least curious enough,
right,
to see where this is going.
Right, and it's if somebody in that position is gonna give me that much attention and credibility, then let's go with it.
Yeah. Another thing I didn't like about it is that it felt like it was a little too saccharine, especially when he first arrives in Washington and he's going to the monuments and things like that.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And everything that I read and listened to about this movie, all anybody ever talked about was just like, oh, and they stole all the shots because the Parks Department wouldn't let them film there. And it's just like, please stop talking about the production. I want to hear some people talking about like what's going on for the character, and I don't know. And it just didn't work for me.
Oh, okay.
The little kid reading at the Lincoln Memorial.
It's definitely schmaltzy. I mean, Capra was hired to make propaganda during
Absolutely.
the war. Yeah.
I mean, this is 1939.
And he's definitely, yeah. Right, you put it like that would feel very out of place today. But again, for me, it frames the movie in this whole, like, can the government live up to the ideals that we've built these monuments to, and that we've taught the history, and says, like, yes, we've got the best form of government in the world and everybody has a voice. And it's like, if you believe in that, are you a fool, or are you actually like someone who could lead the way to that? And are these ideals worth devoting yourself to that much? That's where I
understand why they did it. It's just how they did it that bothered me. And, just knowing other like Frank Capra movies, It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, I have the same problem with that. It's,
never seen it.
That one was also a later one for me. And it's just like the idealism of the experience of this character, I think is clouding I don't know, it's manipulative for the audience. And granted, we're talking about, I mean, in this case, 1939, it's different expectations that you're getting from a movie.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I recently saw the movie Twisters, and interestingly, the first two trailers that they showed were like super conservative. One of them was like I don't know, funded by like, Christians for blah blah blah. And it's like, was
Jim Caviezel in it?
Oh, I don't remember. There were some people who showed up, like, was Eric Roberts there? I don't know. And then the next one was for the Reagan biopic.
Oh, with Dennis Quaid.
The Dennis Quaid. Yeah, Penelope Ann Miller, is she in that one? Does she play
is she Nancy? She Nancy?
Yeah. So and I was watching those, and while I was watching Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, I was like, it feels like those movies. It feels like those movies that are just like, conservative propaganda. Granted, conservatives in Washington could probably, use to refresh themselves on the actual Constitution and what's written on the walls of the Lincoln Memorial. But the way that it's presented, it just feels very like, these colors don't run. They're appointed.
But in the good
They're selected by a businessman and some children.
Yes. That's, well, as someone once said, I believe the children are our future. Somebody
said that. I can't remember who exactly.
Yeah. Dan, I know it was a Whitney Houston song.
Yes.
Don't recall who wrote the lyrics.
I remember singing it in elementary school music class, which we talked about a few episodes ago.
Oh yeah. Ti-ti-ta, ti-ta, ti-ta, ti-ta.
And was it SLC Punk? Maybe we were talking about them. I did the MLK song, and then I believe the children are our future. Anyway, we're going to come back to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and talk about what we would do these days. Dan, are you ready to move on to broadcast news?
I am.
Cool.
I feel like we'll have a lot more common ground here.
I know, and I'm so sorry.
No, hold on a second. Stop right there. Right there. You never ever apologize for not liking a piece of art. It's different strokes for different folks.
Here's, you and I frequently have, a lot of common ground when it comes to these movies.
Yeah.
And every now and then we have a difference of opinion, completely healthy. I do not want to diminish anybody's experience who is a fan of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I understand that for a lot of people, it is a very important movie. It just wasn't. It just didn't hit for me at all.
Not for you, and that's okay. Like it doesn't make you someone who doesn't appreciate movies or America or Washington D.C.
Well, we're talking DC. We're going to talk about 1987's broadcast news, directed by James L. Brooks. Dan, shall I synopsize?
Please.
3 individuals passionate about news reporting climb the ranks at the Washington, D.C. affiliate of a major television news network. Jane is a sharp-as-a-tack news reporter whose attention to details and commitment to quality reporting often makes others uncomfortable. However, 2 ambitious anchors find her enthusiasm invigorating and even quite charming. Aaron has known Jane for quite a while, and they're just as much best friends as he is secretly in love with her. Above all, Aaron is brilliant, and he wants everyone to know it. On the other hand, there's Tom, who's not very bright despite his very best efforts to make something of himself. In fact, Tom is almost everything that bothers Jane and Aaron about the current state of news. The pretty ones who can read a teleprompter get all of the accolades. When Tom joins Jane and Aaron's network, tensions are high. For Aaron, he resents Tom for effortlessly excelling where he falls short. And for Jane, the tension is mostly sexual. She's caught between 2 worlds. Does she become a cliche and fall for the pretty boy, or does she curb her urges and stick to her morals? But this all may be moot, as the network is facing massive layoffs that could possibly split them all up forever. So, Holly Hunter plays Jane, William Hurt plays Tom, Albert Brooks plays Aaron. We have Robert Prosky as Ernie, who's the station manager. He's got some sort of fancy title.
He's the bureau chief.
The bureau chief. We have Joan Cusack as Blair, who's amazing. Jack Nicholson in a very small role as Bill, who's kind of like the New York anchor who is essentially the big star of the show. But not the movie.
Network. The big network.
Yeah.
They're Dan Rather, if you will. They're whoever.
Their guy.
Their guy.
The main guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a guy.
Dan, do you remember what your background with broadcast news might be?
I saw it I'm sure I saw it early on. I don't remember if it was something that like I would have taped off HBO. Of course, it was rated R, so it wouldn't have been on during the day. Back at that time. So I might have taped it, or it might have been a rental. And I mean, I know because I'm watching it in this week, watching it recently. There are so many things about it that I don't know. I don't know how many people picked up on them at the time, but I certainly didn't. And because there are so many things that we get from our hindsight here, maybe I discovered it when I started getting into Albert Brooks, which would have been around Defending Your Life around that time when I saw that and Lost in America. But it was a high profile movie, major Academy Award nominee. And 1987 was really the first year that I was aware of more adult movies. I wasn't necessarily seeing them.
And what a good year to become to broaden your movie viewing.
But John, it's really fascinating. I looked back at the Academy Award nominations because I know that it was nominated for a lot, and of course, Academy Awards, any awards, take them with a grain of salt. But just kind of looking back, because I remembered The Last Emperor won Best Picture, and that was another movie that was on HBO. That was PG-13, so it would be on during the day.
Yeah.
Even though there's a pretty graphic, always remember that there's like a suicide attempt scene in it's like the opening. It's
been a long time since I've watched it. I should watch that one again.
Well, I want to watch it again because it's the Hindsight Academy Awards. I don't know how broadcast news could lose, and also and now I have to go back and watch The Untouchables because I'm thinking, how did Albert Brooks not win the Oscar? Aside from the fact that the character is very much is very Albert Brooks, but still, I'm like, that is a best supporting actor performance, like all the way. So Sean Connery won.
It's tough because I think that it might technically be more classified as a comedy. So
I know
it's just a barrier.
True. And Sean Connery was, that there's a legacy award, and The Untouchables is certainly I'm not going to knock The Untouchables. So it was, but Holly Hunter nominated, and Holly Hunter, we've been talking about these actresses in the 80s at a time when we're still not at a place of equality for women in the workplace in Hollywood. But in the 80s, you look at these actresses who are really and James L. Brooks is a filmmaker who seems to be committed to giving people opportunities, because he's got Holly Hunter, who is really the anchor of this movie. Not in the news term, but more in the nautical term. Holly Hunter is the character that we keep coming back to, and the dynamics of this film are wonderful between these characters. But to me, and this is something we can come back to, but to me, she's the character that the audience is kind of like tethered to, and then they kind of swing back and forth between Tom and Aaron, though at times even what she does, you're like, oh, come on, Jane. But, well,
for her, the movie does it depends on how you watch it, because there's a way that you can watch it in which you're thinking like, who gets the girl? And you could look at it as like a love triangle. And I think that it really depends on how you want to watch the movie that can dictate that, because you can see it in a completely different way. I see it as more of like a life triangle kind of a thing. It's three people who, when the movie starts, you see them as children, and you see their priorities, you see their personalities, and you understand who they are when you meet them as adults. And it sets up William Hurt's character, Tom, in a really fascinating way, because it's somebody who probably has some sort of learning disability, and just is unable to do well in school despite all of his best efforts. And in no way in the beginning are you positioned to go into a movie that's about a love triangle. There's not like a moment of like, it's just like, there's no moment where Jane as a little girl is just like, I'm not going to let boys blind me to my ambitions and things like that. That's not let a man part of that.
Stand in the way of my potential.
Exactly. Yeah. So I can understand seeing it as a bit of a, will they, won't they, who will she pick love story kind of a thing. But you also don't have to watch it that way at all.
No, it's
and that's what's cool about this movie.
No, it's you watch it. There's so much that's cool about this movie, but you watch it and it's this dynamic. It's a triangle. But yes, whether it's a life triangle or a career triangle or these are the three real influences on an audience.
Yeah.
The informed, connected, multilingual reporter who is dedicated to telling a truthful story.
In a clever way.
In a clever way, and in a way that is marketable and commercial, but still there's that integrity, and whatever we see Aaron present, it might be there might be a little manipulation in there, but it's genuine. And also Aaron is not necessarily part of the story. He doesn't make himself part of the story. And that's a bigger theme in this that's referenced a few times, but Aaron is the observer and the reporter. he's not involved, and that's something that they're very cautious about. Whereas, so then you have your anchor, or you have your anchor, your Tom, who is
not the metaphorical boat
Right.
anchor.
Not the more literal metaphorical anchor, but the news anchor, which might be more metaphor. I have no idea. But right, the one who you keep coming back to and who gives us comments and who transitions us from one story to the next. And then you have Jane, who's tying it all together and who is, but also like producing segments and saying like, okay, really understanding how news media works. And she's also the bridge between that like detached, neutral reporting and the part where the reporter becomes part of the story, such as Tom does in when he anchors for the first time, when they put him in
For the Libya story.
For the Libya story, where, and at the end when he kind of ad-libs that line and says, I think we can all feel pretty safe. And Robert Prosky's got this great line, who cares what you think?
Yeah.
And this movie really, of course, like cable news had started at this point.
Sure.
And, you know, the transition had already started from neutral, detached, factual reporting to emotional, biased reporting, where the reporter can sometimes makes themselves they become part of it, and you're looking at what,
adding
and
their
what they're
commentary.
doing. And I don't want to give, there are certain details about the movie I don't want to give away, because if anyone hasn't seen it and is going to check it out, they're too good to, there are certain things about this movie that are too good to not discover on your own.
And maybe we'll lay on the spoiler alert button in a little bit. But I do want to focus a little bit on some of the things that I think make this movie really stand out as kind of one of the greats. You know, this is 1987. A couple episodes ago, we were talking about Baby Boom, also from 87, also scored by Bill Conti. Also that year was Masters of the Universe that he did. That's not part of what I'm trying to get to, but you know,
worth noting though.
There's worth noting. This is a different side of the empowered woman, and we'll get to the ending in a little bit, because I feel like that ending really supports that ideal, and it kind of puts what you think this movie is on its side a little bit.
Oh yeah,
and it also what this movie also does is it shows you the internal struggle of an ambitious woman who's excellent at what she does. You know, there's that moment where, I don't know if it's the station owner, what exactly his role is, but he kind of corners her and he's just like, it must feel nice to always know that you're the smartest person in every room. And he's saying it like you little shit. And she's just like, no, it's awful.
Is that Paul? Is that the character Paul?
Yes, Paul Moore.
I think he's the head of the news division.
Yeah, and it's not like he doesn't like her. It's just that sometimes there are, difficult things that, I don't know, conversations that have to happen, and that, he's confronting her. And also she's at this position at that moment where she's kind of climbing the ranks as a producer and about to do her first executive producing role. And
it is, sorry to interrupt.
I was gonna say, and Holly Hunter sells it so well.
Oh.
She's so good. And this movie, it was filmed before Raising Arizona came out. It was filmed after Raising Arizona, but that hadn't come out yet. She had maybe been like in a couple of little things here and there, nothing big. But James L. Brooks had never seen her. She was not a proven actress. And she dominates in what is a risky role for somebody to put her in. And and I watched the commentary for this one, James L. Brooks talks a lot about, kind of taking this chance on her, but like it really paid off. Deborah Winger was actually supposed to play that role, who had
read
worked
that.
with James L. Brooks before.
Yeah.
Interesting to tie into our An Officer and a Gentleman discussion. And
Yeah.
I don't think that Deborah Winger, who is great, I don't always love Deborah Winger and what she does, but when it hits, it hits. And I don't know if this one would have really hit for her. I worry that and she's good at being the kind of like, the questionable romantic, or the cautious romantic, I guess you could say, as we saw in An Officer and a Gentleman. And this, I feel like Holly Hunter, there's something just about, she's short, she's kind of awkward in the way that she moves her body, she does kind of weird things, and she has those quirky moments wherever she's in a cab, she tells them exactly what route to take to get somewhere, and it's all those character moments, the scheduled crying sessions that she has, which is awesome, and it feels really real, and I don't feel like that's reductive of her being a woman. I feel like it's indicative of her being a human who knows how to prioritize her emotions for the benefit of her career.
So to come, and what I saw it as, and a lot of things, and especially going back to that conversation about like where she's this, how does it feel to be the smartest person in the room?
Yeah.
It's that double standard where if you are a woman who is excelling in a man's world, you have to be the smartest person in the room. Yeah. You have to be the best. You can't be wrong once.
Yeah.
Not a single slip up, and you can't show weakness.
Right.
So all of these scheduled cry times, looking at it now, and again, it's through 2024 eyes, but looking at it as she has to do that because she can't show that.
It's the exhaust valve.
And the irony that when it comes back, that when Tom shows emotion in the interview and it's so touching and he's rewarded for it.
Spoiler alert.
Or are we there? Not there yet.
Well, I don't feel the need to discuss it. But to give some context, if you're not familiar with the film, Tom does a special report. He does a story on date rape. And in 1987, this wasn't something that was being discussed.
Yeah.
So it's something that he's not like, unanimously supported for. Aaron's response to it is actually one of those major schmuck moments for Aaron. He has a few that are kind of toxic, and like that's one of them. But Tom is interviewing a date rape victim who's telling her story, and you see it cuts to him crying.
Yeah.
It like, with tears. So for the man to show that sensitivity and that weakness, he gets rewarded for it.
Right.
And
she has to hide it.
Well, yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's right. But she can't do that.
Yeah.
She has to actually like schedule those times, and she's like, okay, like I don't think you see her like check a watch, like a stopwatch or something, but you can tell it's like, okay, crying time is done, I have to move on to the next thing.
She has her tissues to wipe away her tears with her. She goes to where she needs to go to, and she does what she needs to do, and then takes a deep breath, wipes her tears away, and her face changes, and she's off to the next thing.
Yeah.
It's not that there's something that happens right before then that triggers her to cry. It's just like, it's the exhaust valve. She just has to release it a little bit. And it's a really nice touch. And I feel, and something that's unexpected for 1987 women empowerment movies. I think that baby boom is an interesting one to talk about in conversation with this one, because, you do have the moments where there is, the question of just like, what do I have to do in order to be taken seriously, but also still be true to myself? And so it's, two sides of the same coin, I think, between JC Wyatt and Jane. And and it's just like, it's perfectly done. It's really awesome just to see the character arcs for all these characters. And also it's like, Tom isn't 100% likable. You question him every now and then. Aaron, you question, pretty frequently. And also he gets in his own way. There are frequently times where it's just like, oh, he could be appealing to Jane's sensibilities, and then he goes and makes some sort of joke. And it's not that it puts her off, but it's just like, oh, she sees him switching back to like the best friend kind of a thing, rather than like seeing him in a romantic way.
And to point out a scene where both Aaron shines and Albert Brooks shines is the scene when Tom is chosen to anchor the story on Libya.
Yeah.
And it's national, and like Rorish is away. He's not, so like Tom is going to be doing this story nationwide, whereas Aaron knows, like, he's interviewed Gaddafi. He knows the subject, and you think, and especially when you're watching it and you know what's going to happen when Aaron does get the opportunity to anchor, you're like, oh man, would he have been would things have been different for him had he anchored this story that he had such familiarity with? But going back to Albert Brooks and going back to what the character does that makes him shine is, first of all, he just gets drunk. He goes home. He has nothing to do with the story. Gets drunk. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful scene. But what he does is he's watching, and Jane is like doing a Cyrano thing with Tom.
Well, she's producing the news.
Yeah, well, she's giving him, but she's doing more than she might usually do. She's really feeding him not exactly what to say word for word. And he's doing a pretty good job of making it sound natural.
Yeah, very good.
And Aaron, and even though they're doing a good job with it, Aaron is sitting at home and he knows all of these other things, but it's not like when you usually just yell at the TV. He calls Jane and she's like, tell him this, make sure to say this thing. And he's so dedicated to them getting the story right that he actually gets out of his own way.
Yeah, it's
and
true.
Does he has to get drunk enough to be a mensch.
I also want to mention in that scene, just really quick, we see Albert Brooks and he's just kind of chilling in his really cool apartment, which I love, by the way. And he's just kind of, Albert Brooks is like ad-libbing, and he's doing this thing where he's like reading a book, but also singing along to the music. But then he's changing the words to about how he can sing and read at the same time.
I'm singing
and it's so Albert Brooks. It's perfect. I love it. Anyway.
I love that moment also, because I don't want to say we've all been there, but I feel like I've been there.
I feel like it's also so appropriate for the character of Aaron to be doing that, because he's just like, I'm even impressing myself that I'm reading and singing at the same time.
Right. Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, and and he's got so much, he's neurotic because of course he's bullied at school. So he has these shortcomings. He's constantly reminded of them. So that's why these insecurities are coming out. It brings me to another aspect of this movie that, watching it now analytically, really latched onto, was the idea in this movie, and it's not said, but it's heavily implied, and it's not the first time I've caught on to this, but it's the first time I've really looked at this, is the propensity of network anchors to be, to use a term that's a bit dismissive, waspier.
Okay.
And that, Aaron probably reads as too Jewish for the national news.
Yeah.
Or even the DC area news. So it almost feels like the scene where he does anchor the news, and I don't know if you want to spoiler alert this.
I don't think that this is warranting of a spoiler alert because this is an iconic scene.
Yes. So he's sweating profusely throughout the job.
Hilariously sweat, like hilarious amounts of sweat. Everything is going wrong.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
It's a historic failure.
The line that he has when he's talking about the explosion and he's like, this many people are wounded and this many people were dead. And then they cut to commercial and he just goes, and I wish I was one of them.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah. It's so Albert Brooks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment, but it almost feels like it's like this is how he feels he looks to people.
Yeah, and what I really appreciate about the way that he responds to his own inability to do the thing that he wants so desperately to do is really refreshing, because he's just like, now I know that that's not my path. And the fact that he's able to get there shows a maturity that he's not able to show with his, feelings towards Jane. And, as somebody who's extremely ambitious and, for him, he loves for people to know that he's the smartest person in the room. But to have that moment of humility, or probably that hour of humility or whatever it would have been, kind of like helped him figure out what I've been doing and what I'm so good at, that's my path. And, and that's what's really cool about his character, is that he is able to do that. And I think that it's really refreshing. And on a similar note, kind of going back to Tom, one of the lines that he says, and I'm going to have to paraphrase because I don't remember it exactly, and he maybe even says this to Aaron, which is kind of just like, must sting so hard for Aaron, but he's just like, what do you do when reality surpasses your dreams? And he's just like, he's gifted these opportunities and things just kind of fall into his lap. And it's not that he's not working for them, but he's not working nearly as hard. And he's maybe not as deserving from like an intellectual perspective, but the fact that he just has a charmed life because he's handsome, and that's kind of the way it always was from when he was a kid. And I think that that's a really incredible line to say to somebody who's just like, whatever my dreams are, reality is like having a really hard time catching up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And it hurts. And it's why it's the looks. It's why Aaron later on says to Jane, like, Tom is the devil.
Yeah.
That's how the devil appears. And it's right. And he, of course, he's overreacting and he's being petty, all sorts of things. But when he explains why he says Tom is the devil.
Yeah, I have it in front of me in case you want me to read it. I don't know if you have it in front of you.
Oh, I don't. If you would.
Sure.
Please.
So first he says, I know you care about him. I've never seen you like this about anyone. So please don't take it wrong when I tell you that I believe Tom, while a very nice guy, is the devil. Mm-hmm. And then she says, this isn't friendship. And he says, what do you think the devil is going to look like if he's around? Nobody's going to be taken in if he has a long red pointy tail. No, I'm semi-serious here. He will look attractive and he'll be nice and helpful, and he will get a job where he influences a great God-fearing nation, and he will never do an evil thing. He will just bit by lower standards where they are important. Just coax along flashover substance, just a tiny bit. And he will talk about all of us really being salesmen, and he'll get all the great women. And that's what he does. He tells Albert Brooks, Aaron, that when he's reading from the teleprompter, he has to be a salesman. He has to draw the audience in, and he has to get them on board with what he's saying. And another great scene when he's kind of coaching him to do the anchor thing, and really fantastic.
Right.
But it's a great observation that Aaron has. I wish he wouldn't have said it to her in that way. I wish he would have said it to her when they were having just a regular conversation about him.
Well,
or, but it's in a moment where she's talking about how she's in love with Tom.
Right. No. And of course, the fact that he's pretty much right about Tom, first of all, is not something that one would have known then, because it's more like with the however many years, 30, how many years is it since this movie came out?
I mean, it'll be almost 40 years and 40
so
in a
30
couple years.
so 37 years later, after this movie comes out, we've seen that, like, yes, Aaron is true, and the Flash over substance. There's a wonderful TED talk, and yeah, I'm gonna make a little allusion here to the pro wrestling world, but Eric Bischoff, right? And I might have mentioned this one before, but Eric Bischoff did a TED talk about how the news media has come to pattern itself after televised wrestling, and how it follows they follow the same peaks and valleys in terms of the content, and how they're, you know, drawing the audience in and selling their product.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting talk, and it's, you know, you don't need him to show you that news, especially non-network news, especially cable news, is about it's about engaging your audience and getting them to feel certain things, not just informing them, which is what news was.
It's also important to remember that, you know, news has advertisers.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be a bottom line. And as we see in the movie broadcast news, and also I will say things like NPR and PBS are the exception, because they're brought to you by viewers like you.
Well,
and
yes. No, and also those are organizations, Reuters, Associated Press, organizations that, like, that's their mission, and they're not just owned by one. When I'm talking about and network news is kind of in between, but cable news, you're really, you've got an owner, and you've got shareholders, and you have people who can really determine what gets out on your network.
Well, with network news, and this was likely not the case in 1987. It was probably looked a little bit different from this. But with network news, you have a few different organizations that own the different network news stations. Sinclair Media, which is a right-wing organization that has been under a lot of scrutiny for essentially making its anchors read verbatim the same thing that was like a pro-Trump messaging. Sure, go ahead.
Because I've got a fun anecdote with that.
Just give me 1 second. There's also Gray Television, which is another one that's, you know, they're a little, I think they're a little bit more down the middle, maybe a little bit more left leaning. There's a couple of other ones that, you know, there are these conglomerates that own news affiliates.
Right. They own the actual, like, the different stations. So it's not,
and they have a bottom line.
Be like all Fox, all NBC, all ABC.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there's Fox, but that's different from Fox News.
Right.
So there could be a Fox affiliate that's owned by Gray Television in one area, but it could be owned by Sinclair in another one.
Right. Yeah.
Tegna, Tegna is another one.
Okay.
Go on.
Yeah. So a few years back, as like people were being made much more aware of media bias, Sinclair Media put this copy out to all of their anchors, and they had all of their anchors record. There's a wonderful, I think Vice maybe did a mashup,
like a supercut,
of all of them. And I've done this in my teaching work and teaching media literacy, I've handed out the script and I've had the kids read it out loud. I've had them do it like, okay, how does it sound when one person's reading? Okay, well, how does it sound when two people are reading the same exact words at the same exact time? Okay, now add you and have like the whole class doing it. And it's like how genuine does this sound? And what is the purpose of this? Like, why is this scary?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awful. And bringing it back to broadcast news, you know, they are this network, which similarly to the way that Mr. Smith Goes to Washington doesn't indicate a particular state, this doesn't indicate a particular channel, network, whatever. It is just broadcast news. You know, they're facing layoffs because they have to cut $25 million or something. And, you know, and Jack Nicholson has a great line where it's just like, all because they couldn't program Wednesday night. You know, all these people are losing their jobs.
Well, there's the other line where the Paul says, well, it wouldn't be so bad if you dropped $1 million or $2 million off your salary. And he was like, yeah, it's a sad day. And Paul, just a joke.
Yeah.
But
no,
another point. It's another point. I'm sorry to interrupt you here.
Mm-hmm.
But just another thing this movie does really well is it makes these really significant points with such little dialogue.
Yeah.
This being one example, the other example to throw back is when they're watching the date rape story.
Yeah.
And Joan Cusack's character just turns to Holly Hunter's character and just says, my cousin. Like,
yeah.
And it's just so like, okay, it's a significant point and it's so deftly done.
Yeah. No, it's a brilliant movie. It's masterfully crafted.
And you know what beat it for best screenplay? Moonstruck.
Moonstruck's pretty great, but I think that this one's got more weight to it. James L. Brooks, great writer, great producer, more than mostly anything, directed only a handful of movies. But I'd say that like his catalog is pretty strong and, generally considered to be like just one of the greats. And that's kind of awesome. I love that. I do want to acknowledge that, the late William Hurt, there's a bit of irony to his character doing this date rape story. He's somebody who's been not just accused of, but he has kind of admitted to domestic abuse. Marlee Matlin had, was a big one going against him from way, way, way back. And, had a lot of dings on his record. And, he's passed away. He can't comment on it anymore, but it's hard for me to kind of watch things with him without thinking about that. When we talked about The Big Chill, I felt like knowing that kind of fit with his character a little bit.
Yeah.
And in watching broadcast news, there was something about, the question of his character that kind of lent itself to just kind of having that in the back of my mind, where it's like, this is somebody who can put on a good face and make you not realize the truth about him. That's his real life, not the character, but the lines get blurred.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's maybe 2 movies with him that I like, and fortunately I've seen them both recently. Those would be The Big Chill and Broadcast News.
Yeah, same.
I can't think of anything else. Oh, he's in Dark City. I like Dark City, and he's in that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There's something about him that never really like struck me as being like, oh yeah, that's my guy.
He's bland.
Bland.
It worked for it works for he worked for this movie. But because he's bland and because he's a little smarmy.
And you know,
also,
I want to give a real shout out to Kimber Shoup, who plays him as a child, because I feel like that moment where you meet him as a child helps you understand so much more about the character than anything he actually does in like present day. In ways that the other kids, you know, the other version, like the younger versions of them, like, I mean, Albert Brooks's, you know, version of as a young boy is you know, it helps, but it's not as necessary.
Well, graduating
Whereas
high school at 15, it's funny. That one's meant to set up the humor. Yeah,
totally. But it also, so in that scene, you know, at first he gets beaten up by these guys and he says to them, like, you'll never make more than like 19,000 a year, whatever it was. And then they leave, and still with a bloody mouth, he's like, you know what, actually, and he gives them a more well thought out insult where he's just like, you're going to have to go your life knowing that you'll never have an original thought, that you'll never have crafted a perfect sentence, or, you know, something like that, where it's just like, wait, I need to give you a better opportunity to know more about what's important to me that I have over you. And that was cool. But the struggle that a young Tom has as a kid to know, like, you know, he's telling his dad that he got like C's, D's, and an F on his report card, despite the fact that he's trying really hard. And his dad is like, what if we got you a tutor? And he's like, oh yeah, that'd be great. Like, he wants to learn. He wants to be smart. But instead, everyone just tells him how he's a good looking kid and won't have to try. And he's like, but I want to have to try. And that's what makes you understand him to his core as an adult. Anyway.
Yeah. Great movie.
Dan, before we get on to what we would do to kind of bring these back, I do want to do a little bit of a
spoiler alert
for broadcast news.
Yes.
Because
we need to.
When watching the movie with the commentary, which was with James L. Brooks and the director Richard Marx, not the singer Richard Marx, and they talk about the ending of the movie and how I don't think that they were really pleased with the ending of the movie because it never resolves the love triangle aspect. And like, they shot something that resolves it, but they ended up going with this, you know, this version of it where it's like 7 years later, and they've all gone onto these different wonderful paths. You know, Tom is doing great. He's speaking at this conference. We start the movie seeing, you know, Jane speaking at a conference, and he's speaking at the conference and everybody's eating it up. Aaron is there with his son, Clifford, who's looks just like him. And, you know, and he's supportive of Tom and he likes him now. And Jane has gone on and she's become something else. And it's what I really love about it is that it makes you realize that everything that you just watched was a blip for these people. And the romance that there could have been between any of them is like completely moot. And it's like you go through these things in your life where it seems like the biggest deal, a huge layoff at your job. You are desperately in love with somebody who you think is like your soulmate. You're going through all these things where you're, you know, questioning your place in life with your career. And then it cuts to 7 years later and it's just like, wow, here we are on the other side, way on the other side of all of that. Had that stuff not turned out the way that it had, you know, Jane wouldn't be, she's in like kind of a new relationship, but she's killing it in her career. Aaron has a wife and a kid who he absolutely loves. Tom is doing great. I think he might be married.
He's engaged.
He's engaged.
Her as his fiance. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's
Lila.
like things worked out. Things happened the way that they were supposed to happen. And
it's 7 years. 7 years, especially in a business like that. That's an eternity.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
right. What's interesting is that you see. So Tom has since become the national anchor for the network. He's replaced as Aaron predicted. He said, "Oh, they're sending you to," because he gets transferred to the London bureau, and which Aaron says that's the next, like that's the last step before you're the guy. So, in which that's where he is at the end. Aaron is still in Portland.
Right. He quits his job and gets something very quickly here in Portland.
Well, although they don't specify. I assume it's Oregon just because that's the one that is on my brain more.
It's the bigger market, Portland.
Yeah. It definitely it makes sense. And that it seems like he's gotten past a lot of his insecurities and found like he's happy.
Yeah.
And life goes on. I agree. I wouldn't have done anything else because, as you said before, the movie is not about the romance, and it's about, especially like their attractions. It's more of that like it's kind of like, actors falling for their co-stars when they're playing opposite each other. And it's like when you're the anchor and the producer is just getting you through the job, or you're the field reporter and that producer is taking your piece and making it a masterpiece and saying like, get the Norman, when she has the Norman Rockwell painting that she transitions to with the veteran coming home. It's like, wow, you are taking this, just like my reporting, and turning it into art. And with Tom, you are taking this blank page and turning it into art. And how do you not fall in love with somebody who takes you and makes you better?
Sure. Well, for Tom, it's like he can read what's in front of him effectively. But she is the extra sauce in his ear that's kind of making him dazzle, and that's giving him depth. It's the part of him that he's missing that she is able to fill in. And at times, it's Aaron through her speaking into his ear. So anyway, this movie rules. That
to me is like, that's where the romance is. But now to bring it to make the connection here to Mr. Smith, and this is another spoiler alert for broadcast news.
Spoiler alert.
It is revealed to Jane. So Aaron asks Tom, they're standing together. It's the last day when Aaron has quit and Tom's being transferred, and they're standing there and he asks Tom, and it just seems like a throwaway, like, how many cameras did you have on that date rape story? And Tom says 1, which Aaron then later reveals to Jane, like, oh, he faked the crying. Like, that wasn't genuine. He wasn't crying when she was telling that story. And then they see the raw footage where you see like the whatever camera person, producer, whatever, was like, yeah, it looked like you're about to cry there. That would be great. And Tom was like, yeah, give me a minute. Yeah. And gets the tears, and he's like, okay, roll the cameras. And it's like, he's not, like Tom says about him being or like Aaron says about him being the devil, he's not hurting anybody, but he's taking the public's trust and betraying that trust in a very minor way. But it's exactly like Aaron says, it dings away, and now we've eroded so much trust in the media since broadcast news. But clearly this is not just something that's happened in the last 10 years.
And I realize that you're bringing this back to Mr. Smith a little bit, but I also do want to mention that after that piece aired, Tom is just like, so what did you think? And she was like, I thought it was a little strange when it cut over to you crying. And then for her to find out that it was a manufactured moment, it's even worse.
Yes. Yeah, and it's something I like about this movie that, again, after becoming more educated about media literacy,
Yeah.
seeing what Brooks was telling us and kind of warning us about, it really, and that's where it ties together to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, because it felt like Capra was doing the same thing and saying, like, there are these elements in government, and if we don't stand up to those elements in government, we are compromising our standards and our values. And that's what Aaron is leaving Jane with, and saying, like, that is what Tom is. He's a compromise to our standards and our values in order to put more money in our pockets, because his attractive face is going to draw more people.
Yeah.
And just it is like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but it's in Washington, it's the other side of that dynamic where it's, you have the world of politics, and then you have the media that's covering that world.
Yeah.
Which you do see in Mr. Smith. You have the reporter who's right. And then
Saunders' buddy.
You have the manipulation of the media in Smith's home state to print, fake news, misinformation, all that stuff that I think we're acting like, oh, we've never seen this before. We have, and we've been warned about it. And that's what Brooks is doing, and that's what Capra is doing, and there's some parallels between Brooks and Capra as well, in terms of their, Brooks can get a little schmaltzy. Less broadcast news, is much more measured than terms of endearment, which I haven't seen in a long time, but it's schmaltzy. I think it's more intended to be that way.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, broadcast news to me is just, he strikes the perfect balance between the elements. And
I mean, James L. Brooks is also one of the main producers behind The Simpsons, who's, that's always kind of trying to point out, hypocrisy and, the oddities of the human condition.
And predict the future.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another thing. So it's cool to kind of draw these parallels. One other thing I want to mention about broadcast news, since this is our Washington, D.C. episode, what's also fascinating is that movie was filmed in and took place almost entirely in Washington, D.C., and I think with the exception of Jennifer's report in Alaska, and at the very end when they're someplace else, and
his Central America,
when
Aaron's in South. Actually, with Jennifer, we only have that one cutaway to her, which is a great moment that breaks the tension.
So it's filmed in D.C. with the exception of those moments. Takes place in D.C. The really only DC-ish stuff going on, there's the time at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And after that, we see, I think, was the Jefferson Memorial in the background. But it's not like over your head DC. There's mentions of the Beltway and DuPont Circle and things like that. But it's not hitting you over the head with just they're in front of the, Washington Monument, and there's, I think in a deleted scene, there's a little bit more where you see the White House and some other things.
You don't get the whole, there's a lot of, A Few Good Men has the montage where you see the different monuments and the establishment. Yeah. This is one of those rare DC movies that is definitely about Washington, D.C.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it could have been written to be any other, not non-New York market, and it could still work. But the fact that it's DC, I think, adds a layer of intrigue.
Yeah.
It's they could have filmed this on a soundstage, but they filmed this in an office building. They just in DC. They were there, and they didn't have to. They didn't have to do that. They could have faked all of the DC stuff, but I don't know. I think that's something that's kind of cool about it.
It's the type of city though where it's kind of like if you're in Los Angeles, you are definitely feeling like the movie in the entertainment industry around you.
Yeah.
When you're in Washington D.C., it's different. Like there's a vibe.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's that Washington D.C. vibe, and yeah, if you want to nail that vibe, location, absolutely.
Yeah. And also Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you know, clearly there are parts of it that are filmed in Washington, but like the Capitol stuff is filmed in a soundstage. I mean, beautifully recreated, like very accurately done. Clearly they're not going to film it in the actual Capitol building. It's not like this is January 6th where you can just walk right in and do whatever you want. But anyway, I digress.
Not that you can, but
well, on January 6th, 2021, people really showed you can show up in there however you want. Do what you got to do. Okay, Dan. We got two movies. What are we doing 2024 styles? Do you want to do it movie by movie, or do you want to just go first and do both of them? How do you want to do this?
You know, I'll go first and do both of them. I don't necessarily I don't have a big pitch here, and I don't have any. These are movies that have been they're in the Criterion collection.
Yeah, they
have been preserved. There are.
I would say quick timeout. I'd say that Mr. Smith Goes to Washington doesn't benefit from that because it just kind of shows you how crappy the wigs are.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that what you could do, honestly, I think both of these movies should be used as teaching tools. In fact, I'm planning on, I'm teaching a course this year on American literature and composition. There's a whole question of what it means to be American. So I don't know that I'm necessarily going to screen it in class and do something about it, but I may have it available, like have an assignment tied to it that's more independent. But it's definitely something, Mr. Smith, that is something that I would use in broadcast news. I think I would use in definitely a more collegiate setting. And there are a number of issues that you could use broadcast news to illustrate. I do think that if I was going to choose another destination for it, I think it would be interesting to ask the question, look at Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and say, well, what do you do now? And I know I was talking before about, Tim Walz, but in a more fictional way, how do you adapt this story to today? Because while a lot of things have changed, we're still going by the same Constitution, and we have supposedly the same system of government that we always have. So who's to say we couldn't update it? So I think an update maybe that's maybe more serialized. And because if you're going to talk about this of Senator, it's kind of a great premise for a series. I mean, as you said, it has been the premise for the series.
Mr. Sterling.
Yeah. So I think that finding a way to retell it would be interesting. I think if you don't want to modernize it, it would make a fun musical. You could turn Mr. Smith Goes to Washington into an old school style musical, and I think it would do well.
Yeah. Just quickly, I'm looking at the remake section on its Wikipedia page. In 1949, Columbia planned but never actually produced a sequel to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington called Mr. Smith Starts a Riot. They also considered doing a gender-reversed remake in 1952 with Jane Wyman playing the lead role. Television series of the same name, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, ran on ABC during the 62-63 season, starring Fess Parker, Sandra Warner, and Red Foley. Producer Frank Capra Jr. remade the film as part of Tom Laughlin's Billy Jack series, Billy Jack Goes to Washington, in 1977. Film is loosely remade as The Distinguished Gentleman, starring Eddie Murphy, which I gotta watch that one again. It's been a long time.
That's a good one.
I believe you had the Premiere magazine kind of poster for it hanging on your wall. as a kid.
Sure did.
The 2019 Australian political drama television series Total Control features a remarkably similar plot, this time with the new senator being an Indigenous Australian woman played by Deborah Mailman, recruited to the Australian Senate. Interesting. No mention of Mr. Sterling. Even though I feel
look under in popular culture.
Oh, is there a Mr. Sterling thing in there?
There is, yes. And that Mr. Sterling was described as a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington for the 21st century.
There you go.
So maybe a musical would be the path less traveled.
Yeah, haven't seen a musical in there. So yeah, there you go.
And I think kind of it would be an old school style musical, a wonderful rehash of old, classic Broadway.
Okay.
And broadcast news, I'm less convinced. I'm less eager to say like, yes, let's reboot it. Wouldn't this make a wonderful series? It also, the Newsroom did, not as comedically, but the Newsroom really addressed like news media and ethics, things like that. There have been a lot of things. I think if anything, broadcast news potentially could work on stage, not as a musical, more as a play. Yeah. And but I also think it would lose a lot. I mean, God damn it. Like there are just some things that you can't, the Joan Cusack running the tape and that whole sequence.
So good.
Like it's just this movie really works best as a movie.
I mean, what makes the movie really work? I mean, like it could work with different actors and everything just fine, but what really sells it are the performances. I mean, Holly Hunter, the way that she does pretty much everything in this movie, gives it just an extra layer of awesome. And the movie itself, it has Albert Brooks' fingerprints all over it. I mean, he kind of came up with the flop sweat moment. It was just supposed to be like something bad happens, but it's got his DNA on it for the best.
Yeah, I with all that sweat, of course, but
yes.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know that I would do anything more with it other than just make sure it's seen.
Yeah.
What would you do?
Thanks for asking, Dan. I will start with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And when we started recording, I had like the seed of an idea. And as we were talking about it more and more, it kind of developed in my head. And, one of the things that I really liked about it was that page program and the kids who are there. And as you said, it became teens, high school kids. And I'd love to see a movie about, high schoolers who are in this program who maybe uncover a scandal and or like uncover corruption and have to band together and risk, kind of getting blacklisted from politics for their entire lives for the sake of, uncovering a real conspiracy.
Oh, and of course one of them has to be like this, like son or daughter or child of one of the representatives that's involved.
Possibly. Yeah. I mean,
wow, you could have
there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of
I
opportunity.
like that story.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of senators, so you're going to get a lot of opportunity for, some intrigue,
shenanigans,
some interesting characters in there.
Yeah.
Maybe not shenanigans. I guess some shenanigans are okay.
Capital shenanigans. No, it should not be called that.
Also,
would
it's like,
would it be like more, like, would it be like serious? Would it be like kind of like a John Grisham-y vibe?
Right. John Grisham teens, essentially.
Or would it be more like the movie Dick, where like the two teenage girls find out about Watergate?
No, I think that I like more of the tone of, I'm just thinking of like, movies where teenagers were at the center of it, like a Dead Poet Society kind of a thing, it's like toy soldiers kind of a thing. It's a group of teenagers who, band together. And of course there's dissent, in your school ties situation, there's going to be the Matt Damon who's, has to make the tough decision at one point or another. And
always a Matt Damon.
Yeah, there's always a Matt Damon, and yeah, so there's going to be that kind of a dynamic. And I feel like we haven't gotten a movie like that with, like teens in a while.
No.
Yeah,
No,
and so that's something that I wouldn't mind seeing. As far as broadcast news goes, I'm gonna posit a theory. So Robert Prosky's character gets fired from the station and does not indicate what he's going to do next. I'm going to suggest that maybe he and his wife move out to San Francisco and they own a station that a Daniel Hillard might work at and become a new character named Mrs. Doubtfire that hits the hits the airwaves.
Of course.
I saw Robert Prosky and I was like, is Mrs. Doubtfire a sequel to this? Because it's essentially somebody who's got the same type of... I mean, it's not news that he's doing, but he's like the station manager.
Yeah, he's doing something
or the,
more
the head of the station or something.
Here's something I can do, keep myself busy.
I'll go by the name Jonathan Lundy. No one will know.
Yeah. It'll be perfect.
I love Robert Prosky, and he was fantastic in broadcast news. Aside, that's obviously a bit of a joke, but it's like you said, it's like, what do you do with something that really is so great? And I would certainly love to see, what Jane is up to now. Just because I love Holly Hunter, would love to see her doing more. You know what she was really good in? There was that sitcom called Mr. Mayor with Ted Danson as like the Los Angeles mayor. Oh, and she's in it, and she's so damn funny. Oh my God, she's so fantastic. Holly Hunter's just always been...
Love to see her work with
amazing.
The Coens again.
Love to see her work with the Coens again. Broadcast news though, I'm not saying that we need to have like a Jane sequel. That's how, I don't know if that could really be interesting in the wake of such a great movie. I've gone on record before, not afraid to say it again. I love busy newsroom movies, The Paper and All the President's Men and like all those movies, just the vibe of them. I mean, even going to like The Post, things like that. It's just like, oh, I love the energy of a newsroom. If I could go back and kind of do my like 20s over again, there could be a world in which I did go into like journalism. That's something that I've like always thought about, where it's just like, oh, I'd love to be involved in journalism in some way. I've considered, trying to get into it now, but there's just too many, I have too many other responsibilities in my life that would make, getting like a graduate degree a little bit more challenging. But yeah, I just love that feeling. I just want to advocate for more movies to kind of cover that territory and to kind of do a little bit more with it. I mean, we talked about The Paper. That's covering a very different side of things, where it's, the rush and the excitement and the inner working politics of a newspaper and who's running it and getting the story that no one else is getting. And, the ticking clock of it all is just so thrilling about that one. And so, if there's a good way to do it, I'm not writing one, but somebody else should.
I'd love to see some more true stories, like Spotlight, All the President's Men, Spotlight.
I love Spotlight.
I would love to see more public portrayals of journalists doing good things.
And that's something that was interesting about The Post, which, works in tandem with All the President's Men.
Yeah.
And I think that having there be some time between when the events actually happened and the movie being made, it kind of helps, because it's not as important to you what the people necessarily looked like and everything, and it's easier to kind of get past that.
No, I would love to see, like, there were some great reporters, like going back to this podcast I was talking about with, it's called Ultra. And it does talk about how there were a couple of reporters who were really doing investigative reporting on Senator McCarthy and everything going on. And so hearing, and I can't remember off the top of my head what their, like, the names of these reporters were. And it would be great if there was more, because I'm sure there was pressure on them, and they, you know, if you're a journalist and you're covering that, you know, really controversial stuff, and you're saying some things that people don't want said publicly, it's not safe. It's a dangerous life, I'm sure, at times.
Well, one of the things that could be really interesting to cover, well, here's a couple of things that could be really interesting to cover in a movie. You know, the birth of the 24-hour news cycle, you know, going from like appointment only, you've got the 6 o'clock news, you got the 11 o'clock news, you know, the paper comes out once or twice a day. You know, there's those things where it's like you're not getting the news as it's happening on your phone in that moment. So maybe there's something to do with, like, you know, the birth of CNN and the way that it changes the way that news is told and reported. You know, and in broadcast news, they really show you kind of like the birth of inserting your perspective, your own personal feelings onto a news story, and, you know, manipulation through, you know, your cutaway of you crying and things like that. Another thing that could be also very interesting is, you know, the way that, like, things like YouTube have changed the way that news is reported, or Twitter, where,
Well, and in Washington, D.C., there used to be a museum called the Newseum, which was had tremendous exhibits on such things. And let's explore that in film.
Yeah. Because what I also like about that is, like, you could theoretically do a fictionalized story that covers that, you know, where it's not necessarily real people. Because I feel like once you get real people and it gets biopicky, that's where it can get muddy, because then you're just watching people try and do impressions rather than
they did that with
new.
They did that with the Roger Ailes. They actually did a couple of things with Roger Ailes and Fox News.
Bombshell.
Russell Crowe was in one, and then I think Lithgow was in another one.
Lithgow did Bombshell.
Okay. Yeah.
He
Russell
was very
Crowe.
good as Roger Ailes.
Yeah. I mean,
that piece of garbage.
If he was that good, then I don't know that I want to watch the movie, because that's a disgusting person.
It's a very good movie.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what we got. If all y'all are still listening and have ideas of your own, email us ruinedchildhoodspod@gmail.com. This is a two-fer episode, so
it's
send
like
us
we've been filibustering.
2 emails. No kidding, man. I mean, we're coming up on 2 hours, and I gotta say, I'm very pleased with the way we were able to crunch these two together. I know I sprung broadcast news on you in the last moments of our last episode, but
no complaints.
there you go.
No complaints.
Well, Dan, tell everybody what we're going to be covering on our next episode.
Our next episode, our road trip takes us to West Virginia.
Not very far to go on this one.
No, not very far in terms of space, but in terms of time, we're going back to 1955. Charles Laughton's film, The Night of the Hunter, starring Robert Mitchum, Shelley Winters, Lillian Gish, Peter Graves in an early role. And this is a movie that I have never seen, and I'm so excited.
Seen it either.
So excited to watch it.
I'm psyched, man. This is going to be cool. I like how, at least when it was made, is kind of splitting the difference between 39 and 87. We're kind of meeting a little bit in the middle there.
There's symmetry. In our choices. Wonderful.
Yeah, I can't believe that we're coming to a close on our series. We're in the home stretch here.
Oh wow! What a
into
long,
the
strange trip it's been.
Yeah. Yeah, W, our final letter, because we have West Virginia, Wisconsin, and then Wyoming. Is that it?
Yeah.
Woo-wee.
Indeed. But we've got some good stuff in store, and oh boy, we're not done. Not by a long shot.
No, we are not. And Dan, as you are blasting down the Beltway, I wish you a good journey.
Good journey.